So it's time for another 5 Live. It's 5 o'clock on Tuesday here in WA. And as I say, another 5 Live. Now, this one's going to be a little bit controversial, so bear with me. Obviously, a lot of what I do is quite controversial anyway, because I'm dealing with hypnosis. But I'm doing this this live here about depression because I was actually asked to do a training on this because someone sent me a question to say, do you think my depression is actually a chemical imbalance in my brain, or is it other factors? And I thought, oh, this is a brilliant question and I can't wait to do a training on this. So I'm actually going to start because this is a very, very much refuted topic at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to have a look. Don't worry about my board. This is my board to keep me on track. You don't need to see it, although I think you can. I'm just going to be working through it, and afterwards I will post the board in my feed for you so that you've got what I was talking about. Okay, so here we've got what I've written right at the top is forget chemical imbalance. Forget chemical imbalance. Not totally, but mostly. And here's why. Having people believe that depression is due to a chemical imbalance in their brain has had a lot of people stuck for a very, very long time. The problem with a label like that is what happens is I see this all the time when I'm trying to talk to people about healing, and what they say is, oh, well, I can't do anything about my depression because it's due to a chemical imbalance in my brain. And this is, I'm going to say, it's absolutely not true. It's almost certainly not true. And there are many, many other factors. So let's have a look at this and talk about how we all came to think for such a long time that a chemical imbalance in the brain was what caused depression. So in the late 1950s, there was a lot of research done into the chemical balance of the brain and its possible link to depression. Now, what happened, obviously, when these were extensive studies, and this is the word, that just bear in mind, I'm not a doctor, I'm not making this stuff up. You can do research anywhere and find everything that I'm talking about. You can find it discussed, you can find it, you know, it's there for you to very easily look at what's being said, the pros and cons, and make up your own mind. But the word they are using is that the researchers hypothesized. That means they came up with a theory. They came up with a theory based on some of their research, which was based on low serotonin levels, true, but they came up with a theory that it was low serotonin in the brain. My light's being moved around with. It was low serotonin in the brain.
Can't see your eyes because the light's reflecting directly through your glasses.
Do I need to take my glasses off? I've been told I need to take my glasses off. Okay, so I've done that. Right. Okay, so let's go back to, they hypothesized, which means they came up with a theory. That is all it was. Because they found low levels of serotonin in people with certain symptoms, they decided that depression must be due to a chemical imbalance in the brain, largely based on this low serotonin finding. And this was adopted. I was adopted because it was easy, but there were lots of flaws in this theory, and people didn't really stop and look at the flaws in the theory. And one of them, if I go down here, one of them was that with the low serotonin, what they couldn't actually establish was whether the low serotonin happened as a result of the depression or whether the depression happened first, What they also couldn't establish was a link between, some people only had one or maybe two symptoms of depression and their depression wasn't extreme. And then other people would have many, many symptoms and be extremely depressed. And there was no correlation that they could see between the difference in the serotonin levels. Now, again, this was largely because they couldn't actually test for this, because what was discovered was that the chemical makeup of the brain is actually so complex that it wasn't possible to test for these things. It wasn't possible to try this theory out, mostly because, as you know, throughout our body, the levels of chemicals and hormones are changing all the time. So how could they possibly, they didn't have a basic, they didn't have a foundation level to test from, so they couldn't actually test this. Now, the thing is that the serotonin is one of the natural chemicals in the body that is part of the neurotransmitters that the brain uses to communicate with the nerves and cells in the body. And what they actually discovered was that they couldn't test and find out if it was due to too little serotonin in the brain, because there are other parts of the body that also make the neurotransmitters. So they couldn't tell, is this low in the body, is this low in the brain? It was very, very flawed from the beginning. And now this theory, it's actually called now the hypothesis, and it's very, very much refuted. And mostly what is agreed now is what I just told you about how this can't be tested for and how problematic this is. Also, the fact that the label keeps people stuck. People just decide that they can't get better from this. And if you take this back to my training yesterday, the rules of the mind, how the mind reacts to the words and images that you feed it, and also that what you tend to expect gets realized. And if you can see that coming into play here, if you think, oh, I've got depression due to a chemical imbalance, I can't do anything about it, I can't get better, I will always be like this, and it's all doom and gloom in a negative spiral of maybe this will get worse, etc., etc., then you can see how this label of depression linked to chemical imbalance is very problematic. And I certainly find that as a therapist. I do come across people who absolutely refuse to do any work on their depression, absolutely convinced that there's nothing they can do, they will always be this way, and doing any kind of healing work, any therapy, and basically life is totally hopeless and helpless. And obviously that's an awful way to feel, and that's what that label basically does for people. So let's go back to what is largely agreed. And what is largely agreed throughout the medical profession now is that there are many, many factors influencing depression. There are social factors, environmental factors, there are things like your past experiences, as we've already done a lot of work on, which includes stress and trauma, and your health, your workplace, the people you're surrounded by. All these things come into play. And what is absolutely not refuted is that what helps depression is a change for the better in any of these things. So people will see a positive lift in their mood, and in a lot of cases see their depression lift when they get a better job, they've got more money. Even if they go on holiday, they take up a hobby, they meet new people. That's why we all feel so great when we fall in love, and when we're surrounded by people we love and we have great friends. Even dancing and movement hobbies, they release oxytocin, and oxytocin is the feel good, it's the love hormone. So anything that will induce a flood of oxytocin is going to make you feel better too. So it's accepted then that depression is not due to a chemical imbalance in the brain. That may or may not play a small part, but it's a small part, and there are many other factors. Now, what I do want to tell you about this, that again links to all the training we've been doing on trauma and what happens to the brain. So listen to this, because this is really, really interesting, because obviously most people who have the trauma of abuse in their background, even if it's not abuse, if it's another kind of trauma going on, they present with anxiety and depression. And here's the interesting thing. What they discovered is that the parts of the brain that are affected when serotonin is low are the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the frontal cortex. Now let's go back to the previous training that we did. What do we know about the amygdala? What they found when serotonin is low is that the amygdala is enlarged. And what we said about the enlarged amygdala is your fear center, and it reacts to danger or perceived danger, as in a consistent and persistent abuse situation. And when it does that, it grows. And this is what they found combined with low serotonin. The hippocampus. They found the hippocampus is shrunken and not working as it should, not soaking up cortisol. And again, we said that the hippocampus shrinks in response to the amygdala being overactive and growing. And the amygdala can't soak up cortisol. The frontal cortex. I told you that when the amygdala is enlarged and overactivated, the frontal cortex, all your thinking, your planning, your achieving, all goes offline, all of your doing. And what they found with the drop in the serotonin levels was that the frontal cortex was impaired. What else did they find when they found low levels of serotonin? They found increased levels of cortisol. So I thought this was fascinating, because this links directly to the findings of what happens to the mind under the stress of trauma, and it links these two chemicals, which is a great lead-in to why we see depression and anxiety. It fits in beautifully and pulls all of this together as to why we see depression in abuse and trauma clients. Okay, so we can say then that too much cortisol impedes serotonin. Now, the other thing that I will tell you, we find as RTT therapists, because we're doing the deep inner work and we're always looking for root causes, you have to remember, this is really, really important, that if you have depression, your depression is not what is wrong with you. If you have anxiety, your anxiety is not what is wrong with you. If you have depression, your depression is a symptom. Something else is wrong with you. It's just showing up as depression. It's causing depression, and whatever it's related to, normally it's related to something in your past. So just remember that. If people say, oh, what's wrong with you? If you say, oh, I've got depression, that's just masking over what's really going on. And you need to understand for yourself that what's showing up is depression, but what's wrong is something else. And I actually liken this to when someone has a wound. And this is why I don't really understand how so often people with depression and anxiety, it's just looked at, oh, you've got depression, take this. You haven't just got depression. And what you've really got isn't going away. All you're doing is masking it. And I always think, well, if you turned up with an infected wound, they don't just sew it up. They don't just sew it up and say, oh, well, we'll just cover that up and hope that that goes away, because that's not going to happen. If you sew it up and cover it up, it's still there. And what happens is it festers under the surface, and it's going to be very painful in the meantime. And at some point, it's either going to break through there or break through somewhere else. And I thought this is the easiest way of talking about what we do when we mask depression and anxiety and other mental health issues. And we need to be grateful, really, that our body, once we ignore the emotional symptoms of this, if we ignore them, the body shows us them as physical symptoms that we then have to do something about. But if you think about that masking and covering up, we just wouldn't do it with a physical ailment, and we shouldn't do it with our mental health ones either. But anyway, so what we see as rapid transformation therapists, when we do regression, when we do hypnosis with people, most things come from one of several routes. The details might be different, but it can be summarized really, really easily. And what tends to happen is that people are depressed, and I'll tell you the main reason. And the main word that comes up, you can't see it, but I'm going to take a picture of this for you, is people feeling that they are not enough. Now, this comes about in lots of ways, and you don't even need abuse in your background to feel that you're not enough. But I see this such a lot with children of alcoholics, because if you have an alcoholic parent, where you should be cared for, loved, nurtured, supported, quite often a very young child can actually end up in that role, not only for themselves, but for siblings and for the parent. And it's impossible for them to do that role and to feel good in that role. They will always feel that they are not doing a good enough job. They may be heavily criticized by the adults involved in the situation. And this strongly shows up, this regularly shows up as not feeling good enough. And this causes the depression. People don't know why. They don't know that this is here until they do the work. That's not by any means the only situation where that turns up. It turns up in so many situations where children have been humiliated, kept small, made to feel that they shouldn't expect too much of themselves, or that other people don't expect too much of themselves. Also, this is a big balancing act, because it also shows up where parents expect too much. So where parents expect perfection, or they expect their children to live a certain way and the children don't want to do that. Maybe your parents want you to be a lawyer because there's always been a lawyer in the family, but you want to be an artist, and this causes a huge family rift, or your parents are displeased, or you feel like you've let them down and you feel guilty. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. This is who you are. This is your passion, your purpose. This is your life's hope, your hopes, dreams, and desires. There's nothing wrong with you, but you feel not enough. And again, in this kind of situation, this just shows up all the time. And the other day I went through with you how the childhood abuse creates this blueprint that definitely leads to this feeling of not enough. And the other one is definitely when someone's life's hopes and dreams haven't been realized, like the person who wanted to be an artist but became a doctor because they felt they should. That's what the family wanted. That's what the expectation was. And inside them is a repressed and suppressed artist. They hate their job. They hate their life. And this is going to show up strongly as depression. And we just say that this is where your hopes and dreams haven't been realized. And again, this is something that is very, very easily uncovered in the hypnosis sessions. It gets revealed very quickly, and it's very, very clear. And you know, sometimes when people uncover this, just the understanding is enough. because then they understand that they didn't need to repress this, and they can take it up as a hobby, or they can find another way to express it. And sometimes just that understanding is enough to remove the depression, because they don't understand the depression, and suddenly here's the understanding. Now we can coming up with a cure, something that works for you. And obviously there are hundreds of ways that that could be illustrated, and I've used that one because that's something that I've come across. And the other one that is a big one, again, tie it back to the way that the mind works, the rules of the mind, the harsh and critical words, not of others, but the ones we say to ourselves. We are all our harshest critics. We don't praise ourselves enough. We don't think that we're good enough. We're always looking at what we are not, what we haven't done, what we haven't achieved, what we should have done, could have done. And we forget to just center ourselves and look at the amazing people that we are. Look at you know, as women, look at who we are as friends, as sisters, as mothers, as wives, as businesswomen, all the characteristics and the strength and the courage that goes into all those things. Sorry, I've said women, men as well, but I know it's mostly women that watch my stuff, so I chose women there. Yeah, so we have to stop this negative chatter. And actually that's interesting, because that's another topic that I've been asked to do in another live, which I will do, and it's how do we stop these negative thoughts. So I'm going to do that. Negative thoughts, negative chatter, and this negative spiral that we set up for ourselves. So I hope that explains something that you didn't know about depression, something for you to think about. As always, please leave comments, questions. I am in a different time zone to most of you. It's evening here in WA. Normally when I'm doing these, I'm coming to the end of a 12, 14-hour day. I might not be on social media for that much longer. If you leave questions and I don't get back to you immediately, it might be 24 hours, but please leave them, because unless I really genuinely do miss it, I make every effort to get on and answer anything that you ask of me. And if I can't, I'll be honest and I'll find out for you. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. I really do enjoy this topic because it is so controversial, and a lot of people don't know this information. They just accept this chemical imbalance theory, not understanding that it was just a theory and there's no real substance behind it, and that today it's hugely refuted. So I will leave you with that and look forward to what comes of this, and look forward to seeing you again tomorrow when I do my next live.